Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. We pull back the curtain on topics that you did not learn in school and topics other podcasts won't touch. I'm Kristin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ron Ward. Ron, I want to make sure that everyone listening knows that our podcast's namesake is your best-selling book. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, certainly, Kristin, I learned there was a dirty side to leadership. I remember walking to my car after I'd made a decision and some people didn't like it. And I'd heard other leaders go, everybody's not going to love you. But we all have this little naive thought that I'm going to lead this team and, I'll be out in the front of the pack and all that. I'm walking in my car going, oh, my God, I got a couple people that hate me over a decision. So that kind of started the pathway. But if you talk to any experienced leader, they know there's a dirty side. And frankly, it's just not talked about that much. I've been fortunate to talk to some leaders even recently. Coffee this morning, by the way, 7:30 East Coast time.
All right.
And I got to hear some more stories of leadership woes. And,
more content?
Probably, yeah. At least for Ron's rants, what I do on social media.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I love the posts that you're doing, Ron's rants, but then you're also doing some quick hits, some educationals. Tell us about that.
Interpersonal skills. And as you know, Kristin, I've studied in depth for years on body language, signaling, and face management. And the biggest thing I think in the past 6 months is I've been studying the neurotransmitters of the brain and using AI and seeing what the developments are. So all of that stuff just excites me. So I'm going to be bringing a lot of that. Hopefully we'll do some in the podcast. I know you're into psychology and things like that. So yeah.
I actually appreciate that very much because I just did a mock trial. As many people know, I'm the director of part of the homeschool program here locally, and I just did the 8th graders. I'm moving on to the freshmen next year, but we just had mock trial and we worked 4 months towards this mock trial. And I'm talking, we had a judge, a courtroom, we had an opposing counsel. That was another campus. So it was a big, big deal. And feedback that I gave to my students was, at one point we have our defendant being grilled by the prosecution on the other side. And when I look over at my team, my legal team that would be defending, right? What is it? The defendant.
Defense counsel.
Defense counsel. Thank you. They were smiling, like they were talking amongst themselves, smiling, and it looked bad, right? Like it's like that face management that you talk a lot about. So, I gave them feedback that, look, your defendant was up there being grilled and he was in a very uncomfortable position. And then I look over at you and you're smiling and it looks jovial. It very well could have been that they were so uncomfortable because they knew they weren't doing a good job. And some people do laugh when they're uncomfortable, but perception is reality. And so I was sharing that feedback, and a lot of it was the face management, thanks to you, that I was able to give them background on.
Yeah. Kristin, I've never told you this story quickly, but I had to testify in court a lot in my career. And I was on the stand once, and I had a federal public defender who was known to be very aggressive toward any law enforcement. So he's questioning me, and there's a side issue with this was a revocation hearing where to determine if someone would go back to jail, prison. And there was a side issue where this guy had stolen a dog. And we're in southern West Virginia. So he goes on. And I did mention in my testimony that he also stole this individual's dog. And so he jumps up and he looks at me. And by the way, it's late in the day. And I really do believe I got the judge to even laugh. He looked at me and he goes, Mr. Ward, isn't it true that Mr. So-and-so got his dog back in great condition? And I literally said, I'm not sure about great condition. He said it stunk and really needed a bath.
Nice.
And I heard people in the courtroom laugh. And I promise, I think for just a bleak moment, the judge went,
oh, I'm sure.
And and then the defense attorney or the federal public defender said something about real funny, Mr. Ward. So it was a good moment. He didn't get it back the way he found it. It stunk.
There you
needed
go.
A bath.
That was perfect. And that's, that is one major takeaway, was that you could know your witness statement inside and out, but you have to be quick on your feet. It's not just about knowing, what the witness statement was. It's about being able to pivot on both sides.
And they tell you, never ask the question if you don't know the answer.
Yeah, exactly. So no, that was a great experience. We're going to be talking about something historical today. Why don't you talk to the audience about what we've discovered?
Yeah, and I give Kristin credit for this. And guys, I will say this is a historical story that we're going to tell you about. But the leadership lesson is, number one, I say this all the time, leaders, I said last week, you better know how to negotiate, but I've said numerous times, you better know history. And I've given story after story. I said one time I was with federal judges. We talked about the Nuremberg trials, and I studied that. So it made me look like one of the smartest people in the room, and I'm in the room with federal judges. I talked to someone the other day. We're talking about a historical reference with presidents and debates. And I knew all about like Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960 and the body language. It was partly heard on radio, partly on TV. So anyway, if you build your knowledge base on history, and that's not the only reason, but it's certainly going to help you be the smartest person in the room or give you respect. But it also makes you more well-rounded. And as they say, if we don't know history, it's doomed to repeat itself. So it's very important, very important.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Ron, this is a boyfriend story, but we haven't had one of those in a while.
Oh my God.
I know. It's kind of crazy that I still remember him because I've been married so long. But I had a Civil War moment where I studied the Civil War. I was just so taken by it. I thought it was so interesting. It is. I mean, goodness.
And I'm in the birthplace. But
yeah, exactly. That's what was so exciting for me when I went to Charleston, seeing some of the historical aspects downtown. But I was dating this guy, and I was like, I'm really into the Civil War. And he was like, no, are you serious? Me too. And so I'm like, awesome. He loves history. Well, in Oregon, the U of O versus OSU, that game that happens every year is called the Civil War, and it's like this huge football game, and he had gone to U of O. And so this whole time we had, a couple dates where he thought I was really into football, and I thought he was really into history, and turns out not so much. Miscommunication there. But history is everything.
Gosh, Kristin, I can't wait to introduce this exciting topic.
Yeah. So we are diving in to the British home children. And actually, I have to give credit to my mom. My mom just finished a book called The Forgotten Home Child. My mom is an avid reader, and so she tells me about her books all the time. I'm talking she can get through a book fast. This one, though, really caught my attention because I had never heard of it. And you could tell it really had lasting impact on my mom. And so I was like, tell me more about this. So I started diving into it. And of course, with everything, I was like, I can find a leadership piece throughout this story because it needs to be told. So I was inspired to enlighten those completely unaware that more than 100,000 kids were shipped out of Britain to other parts of their dominion between the years of 1869 and the 1940s. And, they were shipped out on the premise of better lives, but what they got was exploitation, child labor, abuse, and they were led there by trusted leaders. So there's some dirty leadership there.
Yeah, and with all governments, we know there's corruption in every government, but the leaders who organized this, in addition to governments, there was even churches that played into this and big charities. And it was a scheme, and it was aimed to address overcrowded conditions in British orphanages and workhouses and to provide labor farms and homes. The very people that these kids trusted to do the right thing ended up betraying them on so many levels.
Right. And the parents were selling their kids off into this, thinking, oh, like they're sending them off for this great life, right? But so it wasn't even, it goes beyond the orphanage, goodness. Yeah. But anyhow, So let's set the stage. This is Victorian England. The Industrial Revolution is booming. It's not glamorous like the paintings show. Cities are overcrowded. Tenement housing is packed. Disease, poverty, and hunger are everywhere.
Yeah, and if you were poor in Victorian England, you were basically invisible. You had the
Mm.
rich and poor. And for kids, it was even worse. Child mortality was high, and the ones who survived often lived on the streets or in those miserable orphanages.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And here's the twist. Not all of the kids who got sent overseas were orphans, like I just touched on. So 2/3 of them had at least one living parent. Again, these parents were bamboozled into thinking it was a good thing.
Yeah, I do think in most cases the parents thought they were giving them a better opportunity,
Yeah.
but I'm sure they had no way to do any validation.
Right.
So
Not like
anyway,
today. Yeah.
so some were given up temporarily. That was the plan. And then there were parents who were sick, widowed, unemployed. But once they entered the charity system, many kids were permanently taken without their parents' full understanding.
Yeah, yeah. And it was spun like we're giving them a chance at a better future, but let's be real, that this was social cleansing. And Britain wanted its slums cleared, and Canada and Australia wanted cheap farmhands.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's this gut-wrenching story about a girl named Mary Janeway. She was sent to Canada at age 8. She thought she was being adopted. Instead, she ended up in rural Ontario working 14 hours on a farm, 14 hours a day. No school, no love, just work. And then she tried to run away from the abuse. They dragged her back.
Ugh, I know. It breaks my heart. And Mary's story wasn't unique. She was one of tens of thousands.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about the leadership side. Because this wasn't some underground ring of criminals, this was the British government, the Church of England, Catholic charities, and huge nonprofits like Dr. Barnardo's Homes.
Mm-hmm.
It was difficult for anybody to say anything because the people perpetrating this were in complete control.
Right. And so that name, Thomas Barnardo, you'll hear that name a lot as people start digging into the history a bit. He's still praised today as a champion of children. But what most people don't talk about is how his organization sent over 30,000 children overseas without any real vetting, tracking. They just were placed, quote unquote, placed into families.
Don't you love when we rewrite history or we make it fit a narrative that we want, like Gandhi and others? And then you find out the truth when you pull the curtain back on the dirty side, as we'll say.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, and when you said families, we use that loosely. There were often farmers who needed unpaid labor, not sons or daughters. No background checks, by the way, no follow-up visits. Seems like our southern border there for a while.
Yeah, seriously.
Anyway.
Oh my gosh. Well, they trusted, like you mentioned earlier, they trusted that public image. The fundraising speeches, the mission statement. We talk a lot about mission statements. And meanwhile, these kids were living in barns, sleeping in dirt, being whipped, being exploited. I'm sure there was, all sorts of abuse that we didn't dive deep into.
Yeah, and there was one boy, I think his name was George Green. He actually kept a diary, and which is very rare. The historical records of this are not great. So he wrote about arriving in Canada full of hope. Within weeks, he realized he was just another hand on the plow. No school, no family outings, just labor from sunrise to sunset. And his employers would dock his tiny wages if he didn't work fast enough. I mean, this was a nightmare.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you bring that up because they were pretty much indentured servants, right?
Yes.
And so that they were paid, but to your point, what you just wrote there or read there was basically they ended up enslaved because they would get docked so much they would end up in the rears. So they weren't really getting paid much at all. Or it would be like, what we're paying you is what we're charging you for staying here in the first place and for being fed.
Can you imagine a boy 8 or 9 years old, this George Green, that actually kept a diary and it survived?
I know.
That's like a miracle in and of itself.
It is. Anyway. It's remarkable for sure. I immediately was like visualizing, was he keeping it under hay, or like, where was he
That's what
storing this?
I envisioned the same thing. That
Did
it's
you
in a
really? How
barn.
funny.
It's in a
Yes,
barn somewhere.
exactly. Like, maybe there's like a loose, a little piece of wood that he's able to hide it under. But yeah, I bet that information's out there somewhere, but very interesting. So yeah, to your point, imagine being 9 years old, you're alone, you're in a freezing Canadian winter, sleeping in a hayloft, and knowing that nobody is coming to check on you. And, to talk about when and where, right, we shared earlier, this started around 1869, went on for nearly 80 years, and ended in 1948. So 3 or 4 generations of kids were impacted by this.
Yeah, and Canada received about 80% of them, and then there was Australia, New Zealand, and even parts of Africa took the rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really wild. And when they arrived, they were housed in distribution centers, much like, right, you think about one Amazon, when all of our goods arrived, those are distribution centers. So they were
Yeah.
treated like, I don't know, just anything that we buy on Amazon, right? So that's just mentally, visually horrifying. So there were homes in Ontario or Bernardo's receiving home in Toronto. These places were not cozy. Picture like a dormitory with rows of bunk beds, minimal supervision, and it wasn't a good, safe space for these children.
Yeah, and then after that, they would be farmed out, auctioned off, sometimes literally. Some people
Wow.
just paid the owners or these facilitators. Sounds like child trafficking, of course. And families could pick the strongest looking boys and girls for the hardest farm labor and whatever else they did, by the way.
Oh gosh, exactly. Perverts weren't just invented, even though we hear about it a lot more now. There
Yeah.
had to have been sexual abuse. And I think about when the world thinks of slaves, they think of the United States. I mean, I can
Hmm.
almost guarantee it. That's the first thing that someone's going
Yes.
to recall. This was literally like a meat market for humans. And so Canada never gets framed as
Yeah.
as slave owning Canadians, right? But now that we know this, it definitely makes you think.
Well, slavery has existed, almost throughout history. And
Yeah.
I read in 2 different places that there's more slaves today, more people enslaved today than ever before. So it's, it's horrible. It's
Yeah.
disgusting, but apparently it just can't be eradicated. I don't
Right.
understand it. But anyway, let's look at why did this happen. Now, we've already given you some information, but why would leadership in Britain and in the church and all this push this so hard?
Well, I would say a couple reasons. Classism, pure and simple. We see it everywhere. In Britain, poor kids weren't seen as future voters or citizens. They were seen as a problem that needed to be exported.
Yeah. Next would probably be economics. Canada was developing, farms were expanding, labor was needed, but paying workers, expensive. So what's almost as good? You bring in free child labor under the banner of Christian charity. So you're abusing children and getting praised for it. Like it's brilliant and evil.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, third, let's say, we can't ignore this eugenics thinking. There
Yeah.
was this poisonous belief that poor classes were genetically inferior, and sending them off to serve overseas was almost seen as a thinning out of the undesirable ranks at home.
And look, we're not doing a direct comparison, but there's no doubt there's a correlation to the Jewish death camps of Nazi Germany. There's no doubt that there was some of the same processing of the way they judged them. It's
Yeah.
scary.
It
Anyway,
really is.
and then you got leadership with a savior complex and a superiority complex. And that is a dangerous combination. And we've seen it play out over history many, many times.
Oh, absolutely. This is a leadership gut check. These weren't villains hiding in the shadows. I think that's really what we have to think about the most. These were respected politicians, priests, philanthropists, people who thought they were doing good, or at least people who thought everyone around them believed they were actually doing good. And they did trick a lot of people into believing that. I don't know, Ron. I don't think these people actually thought they were doing a good thing. Do you?
I think it's out of sight, out of mind. I
Yeah.
think we've done a good thing you can make anything sound good. I think we've
Yeah.
done a good thing for our country. We've gotten rid of this lower class people. We're helping these other countries that we still have dominion over. Let's not forget how powerful Britain was
Yeah, true.
during this time. So, and it's very terrifying when you get leadership like that and it hides under the cover of righteousness.
Right. Absolutely. Good intentions, even though I'm not convinced these folks had good intentions. Maybe some of them were truly ignorant, but they don't protect you or the people you lead from disaster. You have to have accountability, transparency, and humility, and that's what will protect you.
Yeah, and then when leaders stop asking hard questions like, are we sure we're doing good? Who is being harmed? Are we protecting the vulnerable? When they stop asking those types of questions, that's when things get even worse.
Right, absolutely. And I would say, Ron, like for someone to actually, someone in a leadership position to actually be able to step back and think, okay, and ask themselves those questions, you have to have a level of humility. I don't see that in everybody. That's at least that I've known that's a leader.
And Kristin, here's a takeaway for people is this is extreme and this is a great story. We need to know about this. And I would love to hear ancestors talk about this,
Yes.
People who might still be alive to see what kind of verbal information they might have received, because that would be so interesting. And by the way, Kristin's either sending me the book or I'm getting it. I'll be doing a deep dive into this. But here's what happens. A lot of this behavior happens in subtle forms throughout businesses. When you get people who are more insecure, they're considered lower class, then they actually get bullied and they get manipulated. They have to do more work. It plays out all across the world, but all across businesses in America. And I saw it play out to some extent, even in the government. And I'm sure you saw it at the bank.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Those that don't have the means to leave a job, right? Because they're worried because they're living paycheck to paycheck and there would be a gap. Those are the ones that do and can get taken advantage of.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Do you have any other takeaways on this?
No, I think it was a heavy topic, but necessary. And, if you've stuck with us this far in, you now know a story that most people still have no clue about. And you have the leadership lessons that come with it. So share this, do some more digging. I highly recommend going and checking out that book. Let me go find the title again because I don't have it. It's called The Forgotten Home Child. And I am no way I'm being paid by the author. I just literally was like, I can't believe I don't know anything about this when my mom was telling me.
Yeah, I thought of the quote, although I don't know if I would think that these children, the ones that, if some of them came out, let's say they were in their teens when they got out of this, I bet they were really strong and influential. But I think of that quote, hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. So there's been that ebb and flow throughout history, and unfortunately it just keeps repeating. So Kristin, I hope people have enjoyed this as much as I did. Tell your mom that I loved it, and
I will.
Keep the good information flowing.
Yeah, she was excited that someone wanted her book because she's like, I hate donating these because, like I said, she consumes books at a level that I've never seen before. So, I'll be sending it your way.
And guys, some of you may have seen, Chris and I, we're so blessed. We've been downloaded in like 81 countries, but we also just from Buzzsprout, they sent us recognition that we had 10,000 downloads. And we just really appreciate those of you, especially if you're listening to the end. And we ask you to tell people about the podcast. get their phone and download that for them. I am stunned, Kristin, how many people I've talked to that do not know how to listen to a podcast.
I know.
And so, it's very helpful, whether it's Spotify or we get credit for either one. We can do or any of those, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast. So just get people to listen and they will enjoy it. I told a lady the other day, she said, I never listen to a podcast. I said, would you like something kind of fun, but that you could learn a lesson? She said, I would love that. I said, hand me your phone.
Nice.
I took a couple selfies.
Good for you.
I took a couple selfies and then
Did you really?
No.
I love that trend that when waiters do that and they're like, can you take a picture? And then they just take their picture and then they eventually do take yours. But
oh, I do that. I am known to do that.
That's hilarious.
But, I didn't think of it in that exact moment.
Oh,
here's the funny part. I had my grandson in the back seat and he wanted to see something on Snapchat. We're almost home because I always watch him on that.
Yeah.
It was just a filter. So I get it. Next thing I know, there's 4 selfies on there.
Oh my goodness. I know they have the most fun. My kids love doing that too. Or they can be whatever you could.
He went out of that, took the camera
went out of that?
and took 4 or 5 selfies.
Oh, that's hilarious. Look, he already knows what he's
Just
doing.
to get me. Oh, he's
already
exactly.
trolling you.
He is. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. Well, thank you, folks. Stay tuned because every week we are continuing to pull back the curtain on the messy, ugly, and the very real world of leadership.
All right, everybody, be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.